Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 30th and tonight's movie is Annihilation. This is a 2018 sci-fi horror movie that mostly concerns this quarantine dangerous zone that they refer to as the Shimmer. And there's something about this area that causes widespread and accelerated genetic mutation. It almost reminds me of Made in Abyss and the Curse of the Abyss causing mutations. And I was going to say, except Made in Abyss came later, but actually the light novels that anime was based off of came out before the novel this movie was based off of. Though likely this was just two different people on other sides of the planet coming up with the same idea independently. The main character of this movie is a woman who is a biologist and ex-military, I believe, who is played by Natalie Portman. There are other very famous actors in this movie as well, like Jennifer Jason Leigh and Oscar Isaac. The director of this movie, Alex Garland, is also very decorated in his own profession. He started out working with Danny Boyle, writing 28 Days Later and Sunshine, and he went on to direct the movie Ex Machina before this, which was critically acclaimed and won a bunch of awards. Natalie's character, her boyfriend or husband, went on an expedition into the Shimmer and came back severely injured or ill. And she joins or starts an expedition of 5 women to go into the Shimmer and investigate. From the trailer, this movie seems to use a lot of CGI, which is kind of concerning because a lot of this is sort of body horror and monsters. And bad CGI can kill a movie with monsters in it. Look no further than The Mist. The bad CGI monsters are one of many reasons why that movie was atrocious. But the CGI I saw in the trailer does look okay. This movie looks interesting. I'm gonna go give it a watch. Annihilation was very interesting. It was pretty good throughout most of it, but the ending was so slow, so drawn out, and not nearly spectacular enough to warrant as much time as they held on it. Overall, I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. One of the first things that we as the audience see in this movie is a meteorite hitting a lighthouse and the Shimmer starting to manifest itself. The people in the movie don't know that, so they basically just treat it like an SCP. Although the government agencies we see in the movie can secure the perimeter around the Shimmer and they can protect people from it, but they cannot contain the Shimmer and it keeps growing. The humans in the movie outside the Shimmer don't know anything about it because every single person they send in to investigate has not come out. That is, except for the husband of the main character, Lena. His name is Kane, and he was sent in there 12 months ago, and only just now has he come out, and he is dazed and confused. The two main characters of this movie, in my opinion, are Lena, played by Natalie Portman, and Dr. Ventress, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. The two of them are on the team of 5 women who go into the Shimmer to actually go and investigate the lighthouse. Even though Lena is the protagonist, she isn't exactly the most sympathetic character. Most of her motivations are kind of just self interest. Dr. Ventress was a pretty interesting character. She is a mature woman who speaks quietly and looks benign, but just the way that she talks and the way that she acts, it's like a concentrated version of that like quiet authority that moms have, but with none of the warmth. Visually, this movie is excellent. Like, I love the aesthetic of this film. They use CGI very well, actually, to sort of present two sides of the coin of what's happening inside the Shimmer. On one side of the coin, you have these deer that are shaped kind of like Xerneas the Pokemon, except they're deer colored, but they actually have branches growing out of their heads instead of horns. One of them even had flowers blooming on the branches. But on the exact opposite end of that spectrum, you also have the monster that is most of the reason why I even know about this movie in the first place, the mutated bear. Like with many of the movies in this month's Horror Nights, I first heard about this film from some random YouTube video, and this one was, I think they called it the most terrifying monster in a movie. I don't know if I would fully agree with that, but the way that they executed this movie monster is amazing because they knew when to keep it in shadow and what to leave up to the imagination. In the first scene where it attacks, you never actually get a good look at it, but in the second scene, which is the scene that most people think of when they think of the mutant bear in Annihilation, you only see little glimpses of it at the time, and it looks like a regular bear, except a lot bigger, and its face is kind of like Ludwig from Bloodborne. The scene with that mutant bear attack is probably the scariest in the movie. And I'm bringing that up because we got that, and we also have the little deer, and we got everything in between. Some of the mutations are really pretty, some of the mutations are horrifying, some of them are just weird and don't really make any sense. There is no logic as to what the Shimmer is supposed to be doing, and that makes a lot more sense when you learn about its true nature at the end of the movie. This movie's genre is a little hard to place. I've heard it described as a sci fi horror thriller, which is three different genres. If I had to pick one, I would say sci fi, but there are elements of horror in it as well, like body horror and a sort of cosmic horror. Again, I do think that the ending was way too slow, way too dragged out, but that's something I'm going to have to discuss more in the spoiler section. So I'm going to go into that right now. The movie makes the rather odd choice of having two of the first things it ever shows the audience being major spoilers. The first is the fact that Lena is the only one out of the group of five who makes it out of the Shimmer. And the second is the fact that the Shimmer is coming from a meteorite that crashed into a lighthouse. The second one is something I think that they definitely could have saved for like later in the movie. A lot of this movie is Fear of the Unknown, and they removed a lot of that unknown right away. At around two-thirds of the movie, we get the idea of what the Shimmer actually does. They establish that radio signals and even magnetic signals do not pass through the Shimmer. They have a compass and it like spins around in circles randomly. It was one of those theories in a movie that kind of just felt like an exposition dump and the character jumping to conclusions based on not a lot. But the theory is that the Shimmer does not absorb or block signals, it reflects them. But the signals are not limited to just the electromagnetic signals of a compass or a GPS. It also includes the signals that DNA uses to make more of itself. The mutations in the Shimmer are caused by the blueprints of all sorts of different organisms randomly bouncing into each other and infecting each other. Probably the clearest example of this is the one that the character who came up with this theory saw and jumped to a conclusion based off of these flowering bushes that grow in unmistakably humanoid shapes. So instead of these plants getting the signal, okay, when you grow, make the shape of a bush, they got an intercepted signal from a person that said, okay, when you grow, grow in the shape of a person. And this is not just limited to things that came from inside the Shimmer. When outsiders go in, like our main characters, their bodies and minds immediately start getting altered by these effects. And there does seem to be a sort of mental aspect to this because when characters sort of just give up and give in, the transformation is extremely accelerated. One of the characters like gave up, walked off, and turned into a bush almost immediately. And the main source of this, the meteorite that hit the lighthouse, is some sort of alien entity that wants to absorb information and become it, mimic it. But saying that it wants to do that is kind of misleading because it doesn't seem to have any sort of will of its own. It's just this mindless force that absorbs everything around it and expands itself in the process. And in 2018, when this movie was released, this was kind of just like a concept that was kind of interesting to think about. Here in 2024, this has a lot of connections to generative AI, at least in my opinion. Just like AI, the creature in Annihilation does not think, it does not create, it just mindlessly copies. It inputs data and then spits something out. And while it can mimic life, it can never actually duplicate it because it doesn't know why any of the things are the way they are. This might just be me imprinting my own personal biases and opinions onto this story because when the book was made in 2014, generative AI was not really a thing. But it is very interesting how some things can sort of retroactively gain a new meaning in the future. When Lena finally does make it to the lighthouse, she sees a charred corpse sitting cross legged against a corner and a video camera. And when she looks at it, she sees Kane, her husband, kill himself with a grenade, and then someone else who looks like him appearing and leaving, and that is the person who came back. And then we get the very long, drawn out final sequence of this movie, which is Lena interacting with the entity itself, which took a drop of her blood and created this weird, like, black oil slick sort of form of her. And they go on this for several minutes. It just sort of mimics the things that she does. And because of that, it's hard for her to go to the door because when she does that, the mimic does that too. Lena is eventually able to outsmart this entity by making it hold one of those grenades that is still there on the corpse. And the way that it like absorbed it and mimicked it, not only did the creature itself explode, everything that was also like in the hive mind of this creature also like burst into flames, including these like crystalline trees that were growing all around the lighthouse. And I was pretty sure that those were the things that were sort of like antenna that were like exuding the signal, the energy of this entity and making the shimmer zone bigger and bigger. So basically, the entire shimmer had collapsed. The final part of the movie is Lena reuniting with the doppelganger of Kane that exited the shimmer before her. And she asks, "Are you Kane?" And then he says, "I don't think so." He asks, "Are you Lena?" She doesn't answer, but then they hug and their eyes shimmer, which I guess is supposed to imply that they have a bit of the shimmer creature in them, which does not bode well. And then the movie just ends. This movie had a really interesting premise and was very interesting through almost all of it, but they kind of petered out at the ending. Still, I do think it is worth checking out if you're interested. And oh my gosh, we are almost done with yet another Horror Nights. Tomorrow is Halloween. I'll see you tomorrow for the finale.